comes from the Gospel of Mark in the 8th chapter, starting with the 22nd verse. And the story of Jesus curing a blind man. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to Jesus and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then Jesus sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." Here ends a reading of God's word. Pastor Packman.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, church. It is such a delight to be here with you all. And I bring you greetings on this Seminary Sunday from United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, where I get to teach theology and get to be with you on this Seminary Sunday. So on behalf of President Molly Marshall and our board and the whole faculty, I bring you warmest greetings from St. Paul and gratitude for the long relationship that has bound these two places, St. Paul's and United, together. I actually understand, in talking to Pastor Kent, that the new pastor who's on her way here, starting in a couple weeks, is a United alum, and so I love that there is a further cementation of this relationship. And this, of course, follows on the heels of a long series of engagement and support across these two bodies. So it is a delight to share this moment with you and to be in this pulpit. So thank you, Pastor Kent, for the invitation. So before I begin, would you pray with me, please? God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I'm obviously very eager to share with you some of the good things that are happening at United, but first I want to acknowledge that we have just entered the liturgical season of Lent. As you all know, Lent marks the 40 days leading up to the empty tomb and the good news of Easter morning. And this season is traditionally one of prayer and penance and self-reflection. It gives us a chance to take stock of our lives, to pay a little extra attention to the shadows in our midst, to the bleaker aspects of our existence, and to ask how well our living aligns with our deepest values and convictions. It prompts us, I think, to wonder with God about what else might be possible for us and for our world. For us in Minnesota, Lent arrives in an especially tender place this year. We hardly need to be reminded that our world is deeply out of joint. Over the past few months, life in the Twin Cities has been a constant reminder of the great evil of which human beings are capable of. The militarization of our streets, the routinized brutality of our citizens, the abduction and disappearance of our neighbors, the neighbors who are seized with such fear that they can't even leave their homes to go to work or to get groceries or even to take out the trash. And further other neighbors like Renee Good and Alex Preddy, who were murdered in our streets. This evil has been looming over the Twin Cities and much of Minnesota beyond. And we at United have felt this very directly. Just a few weeks ago, amidst the height of ICE's occupation, our president received a threatening email informing us that a pipe bomb had been placed under a library chair in our campus. It went on to say that this was a response to our hospitality towards Somalis, and our commitments to diversity, inclusion, and social justice. Now, thanks be to God, this was a hoax. There was no bomb. But it did still mean that we had to evacuate our campus, and we had a professor visiting, applying for a position. That interview sequence was disrupted. And the author of this email's purposes of sowing a very palpable sense of terror was a success. I ran up and down the hallways telling people to evacuate the building, and my body was just alive with fear that there might be some sort of violence happening even on our seminary campus. We in Minnesota hardly need to be reminded that the world is deeply out of joint. So when Paul exhorts us in this passage that was read so elegantly this morning, thank you for that. When Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, my reaction was, who would want to be conformed to a world like this, especially in its current condition? We don't need to be told that, Paul. Thank you very much. But maybe the more challenging question here in this Lent concerns the how of not conforming to the world. How can we avoid being conformed to the violence that swells all around us, to the hatred that is pouring forth through all kinds of media, social and otherwise? And how do we not conform to the cynical despair that quite understandably overcomes us in certain moments like this? And here I think Paul offers us some good advice. Do not be conformed to this world, he says, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Now, to talk here about the renewing of the mind and this kind of spiritual transformation that comes from such renewal brings us directly into the realm of education and theological education in particular. It suggests to me that the hard work of resisting conformity to the status quo requires a radical transformation in how we think. And the kind of thinking that Paul has in mind here is not some abstract theoretical formula. He's not talking about calculus equations or memorizing historical facts or church doctrines even. He's talking about the kind of thinking that discerns the will of God, that seeks to better understand what is good and acceptable and perfect. Paul here is talking, I think, about an embodied, practical thinking that he even calls a kind of worship, a kind of reasonable worship, he wrote. It is a learning to think in attunement with God about how to live our one wild and precious life here and now. Now, the best part of my job at United is that I get a front row seat to witness the transformation that happens when students engage in this kind of renewal, this kind of life-changing, world-transformative thinking. United students are a remarkable group. I invite all of you to come to campus, meet some of them. We've got a big week, it's called Symposium Week this week, where students from all across the country are descending on St. Paul to exchange ideas, to read papers, to break bread, and it is a remarkable thing. Some of you have seen this firsthand, and it is powerful to behold. But owing to technological miracles like Zoom, our classrooms are now hosting conversations in real time between students who live in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but also in places like New York and Oregon, students in Texas and Tennessee, and even in suburban London, in inner city Bangkok, and in rural Nigeria. It's a remarkable thing to have theological conversations across such vast cultural and geographic expanses. And this isn't even the most significant change we've seen in recent decades. 30 years ago, almost all of our students came to seminary to become parish pastors in mainline Protestant denominations. And we still do train a lot of congregational pastors. As one such person, I'm glad that we do so and am committed to this. But now our largest student group is enrolled in the interreligious chaplaincy program. These students want to serve in hospitals and hospice settings, or as military chaplains and college chaplains at universities. And some of them are creating whole new careers from scratch in fields like veterinary chaplaincy and nature chaplaincy. In other words, there has been an explosion in the kind of things that students want to do with a seminary degree. And as an interreligious chaplaincy program, United is also welcoming students from a wide diversity of religious traditions, not only UCC and Unitarians and Presbyterians, but also Hindu students and Buddhist students, and even students interested in various forms of indigenous spirituality, from Native American religions to those of the Celtic peoples to even the Norse folks from Scandinavia. So with such an exhilarating amount of diversity, it really is something to behold. One might wonder, how do you teach students from so many different traditions who want to do so many different kinds of things with their degrees? Congregational ministry, but also activism, therapy and counseling, spiritual direction, chaplaincy, and others want to work in the arts. What is the thread that links the Buddhist chaplain to the Wiccan nature healer to the Unitarian and UCC minister? I think a lot of this answer has to do with what Paul was exhorting the Romans to do in chapter 12. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you are not conformed to this world, but rather discern the will of God, what is good, what is acceptable, and what is perfect. Paul puts a point on this when in verse 9 he says that he is not simply encouraging us to discern what is good in the eyes of God, but to glue ourselves to what is good. The Greek word here that was translated in the passage we read here says, cling to what is good or adhere to what is good, but the Greek word that is often translated in that way was also used in ancient medical contexts to describe the sticking together of two sides of a wound. You would actually, if someone had a flesh wound, you would put this kind of adhesive over it to help bind the two parts of the flesh back together. So Paul here has in mind that rather than suturing a wound with stitches, you could actually apply yourself and glue yourself, adhere yourself to what is good. I think that this is what's drawing students in record numbers to United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. They don't all believe the same things. They don't want to pursue the same careers. To be honest, many of our students matriculate without being very sure at all what they believe or what they finally want to do in this world. This makes them different in many ways from previous cohorts of students. But they all share a sense that the world is deeply out of joint. They know that authoritarianism is on the rise, that artificial intelligence is threatening how we understand human intelligence and human labor. They know that political polarization is threatening our nation and our communities. They know that environmental degradation poses threats to human life and dignity on a scale of which our species has yet to fully reckon. These students are clear-eyed about all of these crises bearing down on us in this moment. And they desperately desire not to be conformed to the world that produced and continues to produce these crises. They want instead to resist these dehumanizing powers, to find ways to remain human and humane in the midst of them. And they have some sense, even if it's just inchoate, that the task of remaining human and humane in this moment is going to take a lot more than good intentions and wishful thinking. It's going to take the accumulated wisdom of our ancestors who have gone before us. It's going to take spiritual practices and liturgies and rituals that have been handed down over millennia, from one generation to the next, to ground us and sustain us in times like this. It's going to take spiritualities that are alive to the cries of the oppressed, that yearn for beauty and truth, and that challenge us to both resist the status quo and to delight and take joy in what remains good. In short, our students have some sense, even if they don't know exactly what they believe or what they will do, that the religions of the world, that studying religion can help us to remain human and humane in the midst of this polycrisis. Or to put it differently, studying the religions, the world's most ancient wisdom traditions, teaches students how to glue themselves to what they already know to be good. To not only know what is good and true and beautiful, but how to live their lives in truth and goodness and beauty. And what's more, how to lead communities like this to commit themselves to the same thing. This is perhaps the most important thing that I think religious congregations have to do in such times, is to restore spaces of healing, of humanity in the midst of such overwhelming inhumanity. Now, my position at United as a teacher of theology and ethics and formation means that I get to see all of this happen firsthand. It is such a joy to get to watch our students as they try to glue themselves to what is good. I saw students learning to glue themselves to what is good when recently 2 of our Unitarian Universalist students were arrested with more than 90 other clergy at MSP airports as part of a nonviolent direct action protesting the ICE occupation. Or when other students show up at a church in St. Paul at 4:30 in the morning, 3 days a week, to unload food trucks so that food can be distributed to our neighbors who are afraid to leave their homes. I see students learning to glue themselves to what is good when, in my capstone seminar, this is the last class you take before you graduate, one Catholic student has been designing a project based on Saint Benedict of Nursia, the founder of the Benedictine monastery, Benedictine tradition. She's taken his rule of life that he wrote for a 5th century monastic context, and she's translating it for a 21st century context in Minnesota, where clergy who are leading the resistance can find a deep wellspring of faith to sustain them as they do this work. I see this when a Hindu student turns back to the writings of an 11th century Indian philosopher to rethink the relationship between human bodies and the divine in order to provide better, more life and body-affirming care in hospital contexts, especially amongst members of the LGBTQ+ community. I saw it recently when a UCC student, an aspiring chaplain, turned to the wisdom of their own American indigenous heritage to offer a more restorative alternative to the cruel and inhumane forms of justice that currently dominate the US penal system. I see it when students training to be congregational ministers look to contemporary theologians of disability to make worship spaces more inclusive and welcoming to folks with different kinds of bodily capacities. Or when students training to be military chaplains look to ancient Buddhist practices to provide spiritual care for veterans suffering from moral injury. Or when an Episcopal student turns to their own cultural traditions from their native Puerto Rico to shine new light on how to read the book of Jeremiah in the Hebrew Bible. If you see a smile on my face, it's because I'm so proud of these students for the remarkable kinds of things that they're doing and the remarkable kinds of life-affirming ministry that these will fuel. These creative, powerful, novel forms of ministry are the fruits of theological study. They're the result not simply of good intentions or wishful thinking, but of minds that are being renewed through the slow simmer study of ancient texts and practices and leadership. And in committing themselves to this activity, our students are not only gluing themselves to what is good, but through the communities they serve, they're teaching all of us, including their professors, how to remain human and humane in a world that seems hell-bent on dehumanizing us and rendering the world less human. I trust that you all will see this firsthand when you meet your new pastor in the coming weeks, one of our own alumnus. I will be praying for you all and for her as you launch this new chapter in the life of this place, which has been going on, I understand, for 150 years now. And I pray that this season of Lent will be a time for all of us to recommit ourselves to hearing Paul's words and discerning what is good, acceptable, and perfect in the eyes of God, and of gluing ourselves to that goodness for the sake of our neighbors and for the sake of this world that God so loves. And all God's people said, Amen.